Hi there, I'm Not Your Average Joe, and today we're going to be battling through the abysmal British weather to build a basic pine box. We're back home in the micro workshop and garden for this build. Given the looming clouds, I hid away in the shed to cut some dowel plugs and see if it stayed dry. Spoiler alert, it didn't. I do like having a tiny workshop because everything's at hand. Although my bench sander takes up a lot of space, I use it pretty much whenever I'm in there for something, even if it is just sharpening a pencil. I've used dowel in previous projects as supports, but I've only recently begun using them to plug screw holes. I'll show you exactly how I do this later on. I'm cutting these to roughly 10mm long. Some came out smaller, some came out bigger, but it doesn't matter. A point which did leave me thinking, why on earth did I spend a good 2 or 3 minutes marking them all out? Generally I'll just use PVA to stick these in place, which is what we'll use here. And here's how the dowel looks when it's glued into the wood covering screw heads. Naturally, as we come to expect in the UK, the heavens opened once again. We've recently been planting some herbs and potatoes, so they and the flowers enjoyed the rain. Me and the wood, however, did not, so we migrated inside to start marking out. For this project we're using 144 by 18mm pine boards and some standard 2-inch stud timber. I set to measuring the cuts with a tape measure and marking them out with a square. The box we're going to make today is probably more of a chest or pallet box than what you fine furniture buffs might be thinking, but to date I've made one box in my life, so I was relieved to be given a brief of make it look old, battered and bodged together. When picking the planks, we were specifically looking for those with natural knots and deformations to add character to the piece.
Let's go see what the sky looks like.
Blue skies! Time to crack on. I'm using a jigsaw with a coarse blade to make these cuts. If you've got a circular saw of some kind, that'd be even easier. I've finally got an adapter to connect my jigsaw up to the shop vac, and frankly, it's useless. It falls off all the time and offers zero suction. I'm positive this problem's with the saw and not the vac, so if you have any ideas of how to fix this or any workarounds, do let me know. I like to lay everything out and mock up the assembly before putting everything together. And in doing this, I realised that I wanted the bottom panels to sit within the main structure of the box, but also be centred, so we're taking off a thin strip along the outside edge of each board. These cut-offs came in useful to add a bit of reinforcement to the bottom panels and keep them aligned. We designed the dimensions of this box to use up the whole length of the boards with no wastage, which essentially went to plan until we ran out of long screws with a head small enough to cover with those dowel that we cut at the start. I used the stud work pieces to mark out my eye where to drill through from the bottom into the supports, sticking a couple of long 80mm screws straight through the panel into the end grain. Other than these 8 screws going inwards from the bottom panel, all other screws will be piloted and then countersunk below the surface of the wood by about 5mm. An easy way to gauge depth is to just wrap a little bit of tape around your drill bit. I'm gonna need some new screws. After a quick trip to Wilco's to grab some screws and coffee with Chris, we're back to it. Get through loads of 3 and 3.5mm drill bits. This is the first time that this has happened. I don't even know how to describe the pure manglement going on here. The initial cuts were relatively rough, so any misaligned bits were just sharpening up with a multi-tool and a coarse Japanese blade. Well, that little silent sunny spell didn't last long, did it? We got hit with rain again, so everything got quickly stashed in the shed, and we got wet and artsy for a moment. The following morning, glorious sunshine again, but for how long today? Here we're plugging up all of the deep countersunk holes with pine dowel to cover up the screw heads. This is where I'd normally be sanding and filling any imperfections, but I'd been specifically told not to with this and leave it as rustic and rough looking as possible. I cut 2 long supports to keep the lid straight, which due to my amazing planning sat on top of the 4 internal corner supports, perfect height to drill and screw straight through the lid into them. Back to that amazing level of planning of mine, I've cut the lid sections about 1 inch, or specifically 2 widths of the pine board, too short. So using the other 2 trim sections from the bottom, we made some nice square edging for these short sides. Here we're just nibbling away at a slightly angled cut so that we can mount this edging flush. Again, we're filling the screw holes with glue and tapping in some short pieces of dowel with a soft base hammer. These will be cut flush and sanded down after a few hours of drying. Whilst that's catching some air, we're preparing these 2 little brackets to turn a piece of chain and a door knocker into a lock for this box. I'm heading over to my mum's later to finish this box and a few other jobs, so chucking a basic kit together for that. "20 minutes down the road and we've traded rain clouds for some lovely sunshine. Perfect! The dowel plugs are now glued in place, so we're using a Makita CXT multi-tool to cut the tops off these and make them flush with the box. A quick change to a fresh blade made the rest of the cuts much easier. A lot of people have been saying that my videos are too fast and I talk too much, so here we go, with some awkward silence. I then swapped out the blade for a Delta sanding pad and smoothed them down to a nice finish. Nothing beats a bit of elbow grease, and here we're quickly rounding off the edges of any areas the multi-tool couldn't get to with the same rough 40 grit abrasive. At this point I realised we had 2 screw tips poking out the bottom of the box, so I stuck a small grinding bit in my drill and smoothed them down as well. These bits are meant for die grinders, but I broke mine recently, so I just keep one in my drill box for times like this. A die grinder would definitely have been faster though. Finally, we're on to staining. I'm using the leftover Ronseal walnut stain from the previous secret bookcase door project, which gives a lovely rich finish on even the lightest woods. I tried to use as little stain as possible, building up consecutive layers, but with the grain being opened up by coarse sandpaper, this soaked up a bit more than I expected. Regardless, we got a really nice aged look from this process. You can see some of the sanding marks from the multi-tool along the side, but other than that I'm really happy with the finish. Going down another grade or 2 to 80 or 120 grit would likely have got rid of these marks, but for a rustic old chest it doesn't matter. A quick clean-up of any stain off Mum's chairs while the box dries, and we're on to making a locking mechanism out of the dragonfly door knocker, those brackets we bent into shape earlier, and some old chain that we scrounged out of my granddad's garden. Mum's got into putting door knockers as handles on everything she can find at the moment, but admittedly they do look really cool if they're not completely functional. So there we go then, all the bees, a big brown box built in bloody British weather. Check out my other project videos on YouTube, like my channel to keep up to date with future ones, and head on over to NotYourAverageJoe.co.uk to check out my shop, blog and galleries.